I'm joined now by Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman, thanks for joining me again.
Always a pleasure.
So, Congressman, we have some major news as it relates to the Epstein files. Can you speak about some missing files that implicate Trump that have taken over the news cycle?
This is the most disturbing development since Thomas Massie and I started the pursuit of the Epstein files issue. And here's what's happened. There is a woman who has accused Donald Trump of sexually abusing her when she was a minor child. There are four times that the FBI interviewed her. Only one of those interviews has been publicly released. Now, you know that if someone is being interviewed four times by the FBI obviously took it seriously. The sex trafficking unit there took it seriously. Yet three of those interviews are missing. And Roger Schellenberger and an NPR journalist discovered this because there was a document that Massey and I forced release that said that all four of those interview memorandum were produced to Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell, during discovery, but they are not public. And so the question is, why the cover up? Why? What's in those three FBI interviews? What did this woman allegedly say about Donald Trump? And why do we not have those documents?
Is there going to be some way to recover those documents?
Well, first of all, they're in clear violation of the law. So public pressure is the first thing. Obviously, people say, well, is it really going to work? It's worked in the past. I mean, we've forced half of the release of the files because of public pressure, but if not the courts. I mean, you can't just blatantly violate the law. There are people who can sue to make sure that these files actually are released. The question is, have they been tampered with? Have they been blacked out? Have they been damaged? But there are legal ways of getting the documents. And these documents exist in multiple places if they produced them to Maxwell, so they've got to be careful with tampering.
And what are next steps in terms of what you can do on your end to get these documents to the forefront?
We're looking at possibly passing Epstein Transparency Act 2.0. I were talking about Nancy Mace and others saying, can we get the forced release of not just these three documents, but the survivor statements to the FBI in general? CNN did a analysis, and they found that there are at least 90 or so statements that the survivors made to the FBI that are missing. And those are the most powerful things. That's where the survivors are naming who are the men who engaged in abuse or rape. And so, but to have a case where you have three documents missing and the allegations against the president of the United States, this is an enormous scandal.
Well, if the DOJ was willing to flout the law, because that's what they're doing by withholding these documents, what's to stop them from doing the exact same thing if the Epstein Files Transparency Act 2.0 is passed?
Well, they're claiming privilege, and they're claiming that there's ongoing investigations. I mean, they could do the same exact thing, but it would be much more directed, the Epstein 2.0 bill, saying we want specifically these 302 documents. But my sense is that the most likely outcome is a legal outcome. It is us going to the Southern District of New York, either survivors or Massey or me or someone filing a lawsuit to require these documents to be produced. And any watchdog group could do it as well. Just file a lawsuit in the Southern District of New York to force compliance with the law. And then when we take back the Congress, of course, we can subpoena. And you say, well, they won't comply with the subpoena. That's true. But we could try. The final point is there may be people at the FBI and at the DOJ who recognize what happened is wrong and can become whistleblowers.
In terms of bringing this in front of a judge, instead of going on these piecemeal, efforts to in front of a judge to get individual pieces of paper released, what about resuscitating your effort along with Thomas Massie to get a special master to oversee all of this, so that it's not like, okay, let's try to get a few 302s here, a few witness testimonies here. Like, this person, having somebody like that in place would negate the need for all of these subsequent court cases where you're going to butt up against Pam Bondi.
Totally agree, and that's why Massie and I proposed this in the first place. And I think our idea is looking now to be more thoughtful and wise. I mean, what we were saying is don't have this determination made by Bondi. Don't have it made by the court of public opinion on Twitter or the internet. Have a special master look at the documents. And imagine if a special master had done these documents and said, these redactions are legitimate, these aren't, here's what we're releasing. You would have had so much more public trust for the whole process. You wouldn't have had the survivors compromised. And so that is the ideal solution. But we're looking at something that is a huge, urgent issue, and that is, did the Department of Justice selectively refuse to release testimony because the allegations were against the President of the United States? I mean, that is an enormous cover-up if true. And if it's not true, then they should just release it or explain why they haven't released it.
Right. I want to talk about Hillary Clinton's private deposition. Can I have your reaction to the fact that the first thing that happened in this deposition that Republicans, you have a lot of Republicans who claim to take this seriously, and yet the first thing they did was create a spectacle by having Lauren Boebert leak a photo to Benny Johnson so they could tweet it out and get the optics that they were so desperate for. How can they both claim that they're taking this whole thing seriously while at the same time turning it into a circus?
Well, Ryan, you know how much I've been passionate about the Epstein Transparency Act, which Massey and I led. I'm a senior member of the Oversight Committee. I didn't show up today because I thought it was outrageous that Hillary Clinton was being deposed. She has nothing to do with any of this. And it was a total witch hunt. I am showing up tomorrow with President Clinton because I do believe that President Clinton has to answer for what he knew and what his relationship was with Epstein. But to drag Hillary Clinton into this was totally political. You had the leak. You had people asking questions totally unrelated to Epstein. And I think she conducted herself with dignity. And she set a clear precedent now that is going to be very hard for Donald Trump and Lutnick and others to avoid answering questions. And so, they wasted their time in a circus. The American people see through it. But what they're going to ask themselves is, well, why are Lutnick and Trump and Bondi not answering questions?
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect point here. Was there some recognition by these people that now that they've established this precedent where former presidents and former presidents' family members can be hauled in front of Congress to answer questions about Jeffrey Epstein, do they recognize that that will also apply to the one guy who's at the top of this cover-up? Who one day, by the way, will be a former president?
Well, Trump does. That's why he was saying, I'm not so sure it's a good idea to go after the Clintons. Look, there was the Trump rule, which was that he refused to comply with the subpoena to the January 6th committee. That was the precedent. Now Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton have set a new precedent, and that is that former presidents and families testify. And you can be rest assured that once we are in the majority in Congress, one of the first subpoenas is going to be to Donald Trump.
What about the rest of his team, as you were mentioning? There are a number of people in his administration. Howard Lutnick, there was a photo released, and I'm going to put that on the screen, of him on Jeffrey Epstein's island. That was obviously hidden until just now. There's also Kevin Warsh, who's Trump's pick for the Fed chair. Elon Musk is in the file. I mean, there are so many people within Trump's orbit who have been wrapped up in this thing. Is there any reason, at least among your Republican colleagues, why these people aren't also being hauled up to answer questions? If Hillary Clinton, who had nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, is being hauled in front of the Oversight Committee to testify, is there any reason why Howard Lutnick, who was smiling in pictures with the guy, wouldn't also be called in to testify?
Being governed by the Epstein class. It's absurd. All over the world, you're seeing prosecutions and resignations. Just today, the World Economic Forum CEO resigned. You've had the former Prince Andrew prosecuted, investigated. The Lord Mendelsohn arrested. You've had the former Norwegian prime minister arrested. And Lutnick, who's all over the files, who lied about his relationship with Epstein, who had alleged business dealings with Epstein, is still sitting there as America's ambassador to the world for business. He needs to resign. He needs to be hauled in front of Congress. And every person in a senior position who's had ties and allegations to Epstein in the Trump administration needs to come before our committee and offer an explanation and explain to the American public what they were doing in their judgment. That's what we need to be worried about with the people currently ruling in this country, not someone who was in office or even a first lady 30 years ago.
Is there any interest by your Republican colleagues, who obviously hold the subpoena power in the majority and not in the minority? Is there any interest by your Republican colleagues to bring some of these people forward? Or is it just that, as long as you have proximity to Trump, you've got a magic force field around you?
Some of them, Nancy Mace and others, have said that they would support something. We're going to file for a subpoena and try to force the issue. But the reality is they may say that publicly, but when it comes to the vote of subpoenaing, they're very, very hesitant to do anything that's going to offend Donald Trump. But they're losing credibility, not just, Brian, and we've discussed this, not just with independents and Democrats. They're losing Republicans. They're losing MAGA voters. The most unpopular people in the Trump administration right now are Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, and Lutnick, because they see them part of the swamp that Donald Trump said he would drain.
In terms of next steps now, what is next for you to get some more accountability? And you have been, dogged in your pursuit of this. So what do you anticipate is going to be the next step?
Well, we are going to call for a select committee to have these Epstein hearings, or at least have oversight, have Epstein hearings. We are going to continue to pursue legal options with the Southern District of New York to get these files. We're going to continue to be very vocal about accountability for Lutnick and others in the administration, and other rich and powerful men who have emailed saying they visited the ranch or the island. And by the way, this story is not going away, because every day we see some new resignation, new revelation. People are going through these files and finding more and more and more. So Massey and I will continue to call for accountability. And then there are more legislative options as well. But what we've seen is that when we keep pushing, when we keep fighting, more things get released.
And finally, Congressman, why do you think it is that, amid all of this jingoism about American exceptionalism, and amid the fact that a huge issue in the 2024 campaign was exposing this criminal cabal of pedophiles, and that's largely owed to the right wing in this country, that when this stuff is finally actually coming to light, and a lot of it borne out, that the only accountability is being had overseas, and yet right here in this shining city on a hill where we beat our chests about democracy, can we not find a single fucking person who is going to lose their job over their involvement in all of this?
Yeah, it's at least not in government. I mean, they've had people who have lost their jobs in the private sector, and more pressures being put, but we've had no investigations, not even of Les Wexner, who said that even with all his ties, no investigation, no prosecutions. And the irony is that there were two American congresspeople, Thomas Massey and I, who got these files released. Our names are known all over England, I'm told. And yet in the United States of America, even though there were members of Congress, American members of Congress who started this, we have no accountability. Sarah Fitzpatrick tomorrow has a huge piece in The Atlantic coming out talking about how we got these files released and why there is such a jarring hypocrisy of how the rest of the world is reacting and what we're doing here in America. It's a wake-up call, obviously, for the protection cult around Donald Trump, but it's also an indictment for our country that we aren't taking the survivors more seriously. And the final point I would make is that we still have the opportunity to push for accountability and justice for these survivors, and we need to, and that this is going to be a defining moment for the nation.
Well, look, I know that I can speak on behalf of everybody watching right now in pleading with you to keep going. If it wasn't for the work that you and Thomas Massey are doing, and for the survivors who continue to speak out on a daily basis, this would not go anywhere, because we can't rely on these Republicans, especially the ones who are chairing their committees, to make sure that this sees the light of day. So very grateful for the work that you're doing, as I mentioned, on a weekly basis, and I appreciate you taking the time today.
Always appreciate it, and thank you for shining the light. One final point, Brian, is that I do think these three files that are hidden and this cover-up for the allegations against the President of the United States are a game changer. And when people really see what happened, they're going to see how wrong it is, the people who are protecting this president.